All right, I think we've got our attendees filtering in, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Kim Hansel with Fostering Families Today. This is our webinar series called Tough Conversations. Today, we're going to be talking about when calling 911 isn't your only option. So we hope this is super informative for our foster and adoptive parent readers. If you go to the next slide. Fostering Families Today is a bi-monthly publication dedicated to educating foster, adoptive, and kinship caregivers across the country. You can find us on our various platforms, on social media, and our website. And we have a new special issue that we just released too. That's a higher education guide for former foster youth. So please check out all of our different ways that you can get in touch with us. Next slide. And our Youth Voice program is also a super important part of Fostering Media Connections, where we educate people and in journalism, we educate youth involved in our various systems. And give them paid opportunities to contribute their stories and share our stories with our readers through our two platforms, the Imprint and Fostering Families Today. So next slide. I have a couple of quick polls for you guys to do. Sarah is running tech support for us in the background, so she'll get those going. We just want to know where you guys are joining us from, what aspect of the child welfare system you're involved in, and what age of the children you currently have in your families. So we'll give everybody just a couple of minutes, couple of seconds to do those. Laura, nice to have you join us. You guys do have questions, feel free to enter those into the chat at any time. We'll try to save some time at the end for folks to go through some of those question and answers. Let's go ahead and close those polls. Thanks so much for everyone for joining us. Today I have a couple of really awesome guests with me today. First of all, we have Jessica Haspel, who has nearly 20 years experience working in child welfare and is currently the Associate Director of Child Welfare Policy at Children Now, where she leads large-scale implementation projects intersecting the child welfare and health fields. Children Now, working with other child welfare and mental health stakeholders, helped develop a proposal which later became California's Family Urgent Response System, also known as FURS. Launched in 2019, FURS provides current and former foster youth and their caregivers immediate trauma-informed support and is intended to prevent moves to different foster families or juvenile justice or residential treatment facilities. So we also have Yusef Presley, who was born and raised in Wichita, Kansas. He's a youth leader, author, and filmmaker, as well as an outspoken critic of that state's juvenile justice system. Yusef was 5 when he was first placed in foster care and experienced more than 100 placements until he was adopted at age 13. He was then placed back into the system, this time on the juvenile justice side. Yusef has a strong voice and insight on foster care to prison pipelines. His goal is to ensure other young people don't have to experience the hardships he has endured. Along with progeny, Yusef is a national youth representative on the Center for Law and Social Policy team, as well as a youth leader for the national organization Youth First. So happy to have both of you here with us today for this conversation. It's a super important one. It's one that we don't often talk about in foster and adoptive parent circles, I don't think. So I'm excited to be able to share this discussion with this audience. So Yusef, let's start with you. You were first in foster care at age 5. in 100 foster homes and briefly incarcerated at 13. What do you want listeners to understand about your experiences?
Yes, thank you for having me. So I would want listeners and viewers to understand that it wasn't easy. It was hard going from placement to placement, house to house, trying to fit in with different families and things like that. And sometimes it's uncertainty, not knowing what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear. And then on top of that, you're missing your mom, you're missing your dad, your brothers and sisters. So, it was very tough and it was hard to deal with.
Thank you so much. That's a lot of different homes to try to, and oftentimes it is the young person who feels like they have to fit into the home where they go. So that's a lot of different moves to experience. So tell me a little bit about what happened when you were incarcerated and what kind of prompted that.
So it's originally started with me stopping taking my medication because I wanted to feel normal. I wanted to be like regular kids. I wanted to do what they do and things like that. And really, I would say my behavior really took a turn when I really started missing my big sister and missing my mom. And so it started dwelling on me, and I didn't know how to express what I felt. And so I expressed it with running away, kicking doors, and just doing different behavioral problems. And that eventually led me down the wrong road.
So I know you're talking about your medication. So I do think as a society as a whole, like we are often quick to medicate sometimes rather than go through therapy processes. Um, so how was that for you? Was that something you felt forced to be on with medication?
So when they were prescribing me medication, and keep in mind, I'm only 6, 7, 8 years old, they're prescribing me so much medication that I'm going to sleep. I'm not able to participate in daily activities. And, at that point, my workers and things, they're getting on to me saying, hey, you need to get up and participate. But I can't, I'm fighting this medication and I'm not coping well. And you also got to keep in mind medication has side effects and they can make you do different things. So I could say you could say I'm not a big fan of it. So that's why I was trying to, get off of it.
Yeah, for sure. So I just wanted to point everybody to the fact that youth in foster care oftentimes are over medicated, to the point that the American Academy of Pediatrics has a special group just dedicated to this, and you can go to their website and look at their guidance on medication use for youth in foster care and juvenile justice settings, because I think it's um, what isn't that long ago that attention was brought to this issue. So I really appreciate you sharing. So tell me what it was like when you were incarcerated for the first time.
It was very terrible. Looking at four walls every day, eating only 3 meals, and because I'm used to being able to go snack and things like that whenever I want to. So whenever I first got incarcerated, it was like a reality check, a culture shock. So I'm thinking too much, and it's really driving me crazy. I'm not sleeping well. I'm stressed out. I'm agitated, and so I would say that was some of the worst times of my life, and I never want to go back.
Yeah, for sure. So how long were you incarcerated the first time?
This is as a juvenile, so luckily I only had to do 4 months in juvenile prison. So, and I was blessed to only have to do that, and that was too much for me at that time.
So is there an instance that stands out in your mind of a foster adoptive parent calling the police or asking for you to be moved to a different home? And what did that feel like for you? And do you feel like it had like a long-term impact?
So there is a situation. So there's a kid by the name here in Wichita, Kansas, a young man by the name of Cedric Lofton. He was a foster kid and he was having a mental breakdown. and his foster parent was instructed by DCF to call the police. And when they called the police, he was asking the police, "Are you guys gonna kill me? Are you guys gonna hurt me?" And things like that. And you could tell he was just freaking out. So they took Cedric Lofton down to JDF, and he was still having a mental breakdown, and he ended up having to get restrained. And 4 staff members sat on him in the prone position, and he ended up dying in police custody.
Thanks for sharing that, Yusuf. Cedric is not the only youth who has been killed by police violence. Micaiah Bryant was killed. It'll be a year ago in April. So we know that when people call the police, that there are profound lasting impacts on the young people, whether that leads to a life of incarceration or even death. And we know that youth who are Black and brown identifying are at much higher risk of the police being called and for having some of these things happen to them. So I really appreciate you drawing attention to that. And we hope that maybe through what we share today and the work you're doing going forward helps to change some of those things. So I want to just switch gears for just a minute and introduce our next panelist, Jessica, with Children Now. The California group that she's involved with helped shape the state's family urgent response system known as FERS. She's going to give us a little bit more background on that, and we're going to switch back over to some slides so she can run through those.
Great, thanks, Kim. You can scroll to the next slide, it's fine. Great, thank you everyone for having me here. I'm really excited to share some of the information about California's Family Urgent Response System because it was created to address many of the issues that we're talking about today, which is, a real need for an alternative resource to call besides 911 in situations so that we, aren't criminalizing our youth that have experienced trauma or leading to some of these really tragic results that can happen when police are involved. So I just want to back up a second because I know a lot of people on the call probably have never heard of FERS. And so I just want to share what it is and sort of what its goal is, what we were trying to do when we created it. And I'll just say, Children Now is a nonprofit in California. We worked with a really large group to shape this idea and get it, put into law. And that large group I referred to involved also caregivers and young people in care, sharing what they felt was a really huge gap in resources and what they needed. So I just want to say that because I think it's really important that any of these programs or resources that we're building, that we have those most affected at the table helping develop them. So what is FERS? It's a statewide resource in California to provide free 24/7, 365-day-a-year support to children and youth up to age 21 who've spent time in foster care in California and their caregivers for any issues, big or small. And I'll kind of talk a little bit more about what I mean by any issues, big or small, in a minute. But what supports are available through FERS? One is phone, text, or chat support that's provided through a statewide hotline. And the people staffing that are caring counselors, they may be peers or mental health professionals who are available to listen and help youth and or caregivers work through any conflicts or problems or just issues that are arising that are potentially affecting their stability, like the stability of the living situation or something that could, without support lead to police being called or psychiatric hospitalization or any number of sort of outcomes that we want to avoid. Also available through FERS is 24/7 in-person support if it's wanted. So, the youth or caregiver may reach out to FERS and get sort of that phone, text, chat support. And if they say, you know, I still need more help, I want someone to come provide in-person support, that's also available. And a team will come to where the youth or caregiver is saying they want to be met. And then the third, you know, resource along with that is help in connecting to longer-term community-based resources, because often we know it can be difficult to navigate getting the supports you need in place. And so what FERS was created to do was to be that resource to provide that really immediate support in the moment when a critical issue is coming up, but then also make those longer term connections, because we can fix sort of, or not fix, we can respond and provide a supportive response, you know, in the moment. But if families are not getting linked to the supports they need, you know, then those issues are going to keep coming up, right? So it's really wanting to make sure that we're meeting that immediate need, but we're also helping make those linkages to the ongoing supports. Next slide, please. And then again, I think I touched on this a little, but I really want to highlight it because I think FERS is really unique in sort of what we're trying to do with it. The goals are extremely broad. So when we created it, one of the goals we had was we wanted to prevent 911 calls and law enforcement involvement whenever possible, because we know it leads to like the needless criminalization of youth that have experienced trauma. And that's just not the right response that we want to see happen. We also wanted to help prevent placement disruptions and preserve relationships between the child and youth and their caregiver, prevent psychiatric hospitalizations and placement into institutions or group homes, congregate care, promote healing, promote stability, and again, that idea of connecting to ongoing resources. Next slide, please. And so when should youth or caregivers reach out? Again, I know it's a little vague when we say for issues big or small, but we really want young people and caregivers to be able to define for themselves when they need help and when that sort of critical issue is coming up. And so we wanted to have a resource where it wasn't driven by the professionals. So many of our resources out there are driven by the system and people saying, oh, your need doesn't fit into this, into our rules, right? Or your need, it doesn't rise to a big enough emergency. And so we didn't want that with FERS. We really wanted, when the critical issues coming up, for youth and caregivers to have somewhere they could reach out to. And it could be something that is, you know, a real mental health crisis, but it could also just be, you know, the young person and the caregiver have a verbal argument over something and they're not seeing eye to eye, and it's helpful to have a neutral person to talk to kind of help, you know, calm the situation down. So again, it could be a lot of different situations. And again, this is meant to be a safe and judgment-free resource to help youth and caregivers feel supported. I included some information on how to reach FERS. It is a resource that's available in California. So I just want to, you know, mention that because I know we may have people that are calling from or that are listening from other states. But if you are a caregiver in California, I'd encourage you to please, you know, program the phone number into your phone so that when an issue comes up, you're not trying to remember, hey, I remember someone said something about a resource, but I don't remember what it is or what the number is. Because we know that when issues come up, it can often be really hard to remember what's there to support you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I think it's important. You touched on like people call for a lot of reasons. I moderate a couple of Facebook groups for foster adoptive parents. And, I see it encouraged frequently, if they find drugs or alcohol, or a kid has a meltdown, to just call the police. And so it's really nice that you guys have that alternative that you're setting up that helps give the families the support they need. That is not, because there are real consequences to calling the police that people need to think about. There was one question about what the response time was when you call FERS. Do you have that, Jessica?
Yeah, so when if you were to call, there is like a short, I think it's like 20-second recording with some information. and then you get to a counselor. If someone wants the in-person, help as well, what happens is the counselor that you've been speaking to at the statewide hotline does what's called a warm handoff. And there's a 3-way call to loop in the contact at the local level with the team and share the information so that you're not retelling your story or sharing information a second time, because we know how frustrating that can be. We've all had that experience. And the team is supposed to be out there in person within 1 hour. There is, extenuating circumstances where they can take up to 3 hours, but that should not be the norm. It should be under an hour. And they should be in contact with the family to kind of know where they are and when they're going to get there. The only exception I would say to that, and again, this is all sort of driven by the caregiver or youth, because the youth can call themselves too. So it's a resource for both. But if a youth or caregiver says, I want you to come at a specific time, like maybe they're calling at 9 a.m., but they say, there's a situation that comes up every day when, my child comes home from school and I'm having trouble navigating that. You can schedule then and say, I want the team to show up at 4 o'clock. So that would be a situation where, because the caregiver or youth is asking for it to be outside of that, 1 hour time frame, where you would have take longer, but generally it should be within 1 hour.
That's great. So my question was going to be, like, when people call, what happens? Is there anything else you'd add to what you just said?
I guess what I would just add is, like, what happens at the phone level is real. I mean, it's all very tailored to the situation, because we're dealing with so many different situations and unique situations. And so, if someone is calling, because I think I saw something in the chat about, a mental health crisis, the person on the other line is going to respond based on the situation. So if someone is raising, a situation that seems like there may be some real safety concerns, they're going to go through some questions to kind of assess risk, and they're going to try and help put a safety plan or de-escalate to the, so that everyone is safe until a team can get out there. So that's one of the things, again, they may not go through that same screen if someone's calling about, an argument, but there doesn't seem to be a major safety issue that's been raised. So I just wanted to again emphasize that it's not cookie cutter. It's really based on the situation. And I guess the other thing I would just add is if in-person support is wanted and a team is coming out, it's generally going to be 2 people, because the idea being that it may be helpful to have someone that can kind of meet with the caregiver and someone that can meet with the youth and kind of do some work with each, de-escalating, and then bring everyone back together, rather than one person trying to manage that. So I think otherwise that kind of covers how it works.
Okay. There's a question that asks, do you ever attempt to do like same race crisis responders to the home?
So I can't. So how it works is that there's this statewide hotline, and then because California is such a large state, there's 58 different counties, and each county has a different setup for their response team. We've really encouraged that, as the counties have developed their teams, to really be looking at their demographics and trying to ensure that they have, that their teams look like the communities they're serving. That said, I can't guarantee that that's always going to happen. I think it's something, and FERS just launched in, it was enacted a couple years ago into law, but it launched last year in 2021. So I think it's still, something we're working to make sure it's shaped in a way that's best supporting youth and families. Because one of the things that we've really pushed for was also that peers be part of the response. And so in some counties that is happening, and in some counties, I think they're still working to figure out how to incorporate that into the team.
Awesome. Just a reminder, today we're talking about alternatives to calling 911. So there's a few questions going to the chat, but if you have more, please put them there. My next question is, what do you believe the best alternative options families have to calling the police or asking for a child to be removed? Yusuf, let's start with you.
I would definitely say mental health or comm care workers. So here in Wichita, we have comm care workers, and those are like therapists, and they come out and speak with the youth, help them deal with what they're dealing with. There's also like a mobile crisis unit. I don't know all the details about that, but that's definitely an alternative for something like that. Even calling on the community, asking them to come in for some support. Someone who's like, if a child is having a problem, someone like a PE coach, a basketball coach, just someone that's familiar with the child in the community.
Yeah, that's great. And I just want to remind everybody that the kids who come into foster care and juvenile justice systems, they've experienced a lot. They've had a lot of traumas. So I would be angry too. So if anger is the emotion that comes out that day, you need to be prepared to handle that as a caregiver. So, trying to put these options in place are important, so that we're not making knee-jerk reactions to them and we're prepared to handle the situations as they present themselves. Jessica, do you have any thoughts as to, alternatives to calling the police besides first, obviously call first?
Right. I think in each state it may vary, but trying to find programs that are similar to FERS or like Yusuf has mentioned, a lot of states might have mobile crisis response teams, or foster care agencies may have after hours or 24-hour numbers or warm lines. I think anything that we can do to have police be the last call you make is the best. But I think the other thing is really also for a caregiver, and I know it's really hard, being the squeaky wheel, because a lot of times you need support and the child in your care needs support, and these sort of urgent situations come up because you haven't been given the support you need to prevent it from getting to that place. And so I think that's the other piece, is really being the squeaky wheel to try and get the supports and services you need in place, and so that you have also maybe someone that's working with you already, like a counselor or a mentor that you can call when these situations come up, so there are more alternatives.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely know my fair share of foster and adoptive families who've, had to walk through fire to advocate for the kids in their homes. So, it's nice that we have programs that are helping get there before they have to be at that level of advocate for their kids. So that's great. I just wanted to circle back with you guys a little bit. We touched on Micaiah Bryant and Cedric earlier, but these are really real risks of harm for especially Black and Brown youth in the system. So what are your thoughts about these risks of harm and the young people whose lives have even been lost and forever changed? Yusuf, you want to start?
Well, can you clarify what you're asking?
Just, like, what are your thoughts on, the risks of harm to these young people when the police are called?
So first of all, just a police presence at times like that is traumatizing. It can affect you differently. So when I was watching the Cedric Lofton film, I saw how he reacted to the police, and I seen how nervous he got. He started asking questions like, "Are you guys gonna kill me? What do you guys want?" And I just felt for him. It broke my heart to watch it, and I just wish like I could have been there to maybe comfort him, help him. Like, hey, let's just go. Let's go somewhere else. Let's go talk. Let's just get whatever's inside of you. Let's talk about it, get it out of you, instead of having that police presence and escalating things. And you can tell as soon as police got on scene that things just escalated, and that's not good.
Yeah, I could see how that peer support in the first program would be really nice for a young person to have somebody who can relate. So, Jessica, do you have any thoughts you would like to share?
I would just echo what Yusuf said. I mean, I was going to say, obviously the risk of physical harm or death is there, and it's horrible and it's tragic. But I think sometimes there's also these unseen risks that Yusuf pointed to, which is even when it doesn't get quite that far, just the mere police presence invoking fear and sort of making the trauma that the child has already had worse because, it's, triggering. There's also, I don't want to understate the sort of alarming numbers of children that are in foster care that then cross over into the juvenile justice system. And often it's because they're exhibiting a behavior and it might be challenging, or having a mental health need. And instead of getting them the mental health support or a response like FERS or something similar, police are called, and we're just criminalizing the behavior when it's a result of their trauma. So, and it also is triggering from the standpoint of, sometimes kids come into care with police are the ones removing them. And so all of that, even if you have police officers that in a specific situation might be trained for this situation, it still can be really traumatizing to the child.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That I was going to remind people of that too. So, Yusuf, I want to circle back to you because your journey through foster care and the youth justice system has been long. So what do you feel like needs to be done to better prepare foster, adoptive, and kinship families so that 20 years from now, we're not having this same conversation?
Well, I would say better. Well, first of all, the system needs to equip these foster parents with better things, like training, finances, just have plans in place for these youth, because a lot of times, these kids age out of the system and they have nothing, they don't have a plan, so that means they resort to criminal activity and in homelessness and find themselves in jail. So, I would just really say have a plan, in place for these youth, and, making sure that they have financial stability, education, and just if they want to go to college, have them some college paid for them so they can go. So it's a lot of different things that we could do.
Yeah, for sure. And just in case you guys aren't aware, the most recent statistics are that like 3% of former foster youth attain a college degree. So, there's a long ways to go before we have youth, being set up for success in that way. So, Jessica, what are your thoughts about improving outcomes, preventing moves, helping support young people so families aren't getting to the point that they feel like calling the police is the only thing they can do?
I think we really, again, this goes back to we need to wrap children and families with the supports they need way earlier. We need to look at it before there's an emergency. We need to have 24/7 resources that caregivers are aware exist, because that's also an issue. Sometimes there's a resource, but people don't know about it. So we need to really make sure that caregivers are given the information and tools they need to know, like, here's what you can do when these things come up instead of calling 911. I think we just also need to do a better job listening to youth and caregivers about what they need and helping support them in an individual way instead of just, okay, this is what we're offering to all caregivers or youth. And then I think Yusuf already pointed to it, but I think there's a great need for additional education on trauma and training and support. Because I think a lot of times when this happens, it's not, I think a caregiver may have very good intentions and they don't know what to do, right? Or if a child is having certain behaviors, they may feel like, I don't know how to keep the child safe. And so they're making the call because they do care and want to make sure the child's safe. It's just, unfortunately, police often, aren't going to help that situation.
Right, right. So I wanted to add that the Attach conference is going to be in LA this fall too, and they do have some scholarships available for California foster adoptive kinship families. If anybody wants to check those out, I think it's attach.org. I also wanted to add, like, I think it's important also at this juncture to kind of talk about kinship families, because a lot of times they come to parenting kids without any warning. They get a call that's like, hey, your grandkid, you want to come get your grandkid, and they have to make that decision on a split second notice. So they don't have the opportunity to do some of the pre-licensing training that foster parents do, adoptive parents. They go in to this with like a decision, and probably like months to years of planning. So, and it's challenging for kinship families to find some of the resources, because a lot of them aren't licensed. They take the kids before they enter the foster care system. So, that these resources are available to them too is an important thing for us to remember when we're working in this realm, is that those people are doing a great service, not only to the child and their family, but to the country as a whole, because they're taking care of kids who would otherwise be in foster care. So I just wanted to note that as well. So Yusuf, you are a filmmaker, and you're working on telling some pretty powerful stories. Can you tell us a little bit about what the name of the project, what it is, and when people can expect to see it?
Yes, so it is the YP project, which stands for actually me, Yusuf Presley, but it also stands for Youth Prison Pipeline. So I created that because I was in foster care, and I seen like how it became institutionalized being in foster care, and I know that other youth are experiencing the same things, and I want to be able to raise awareness on that and show them how to break that cycle, because obviously we know the stats that foster youth are most likely to go to prison, most likely to be homeless, and least likely to graduate and things like that. We know all that. So I want to raise awareness on those things and show them that what we can do to do better. So you guys can also check out my page. It's on Facebook. So I'll be posting more videos soon. It's called the YP Project on Facebook. So go ahead and give it a look, give it a like.
If you can, Yusuf, feel free to pull a link and post that in the chat too, so people can find it. That would be awesome. So obviously you guys have, been working in this realm for a long time, but I'm just curious if there's like one story that kind of stands out in your mind about why it's so important that we, do this work and have good alternatives to calling the police. So Jessica, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I can give a couple of examples even from like FERS success stories, as we'll call them. I mean, we had one story about a caregiver who called for support and was actually giving, in California, there's 14-day notice. I know the days can vary in each state, but giving notice that they wanted the child to be moved, and this was supposed to be an adoptive placement, and a team was able to go out and really like help in the moment, and then really connect the family with resources they needed. Unfortunately, they had been asking for resources, and things just the ball got dropped. I just put it as that, we know that happens. But with the team, they were able to help make those connections and also go out on a couple occasions to provide ongoing support where those things were made. And not only did the situation stabilize, but it actually has since then proceeded to adoption and a completed adoption. And to me, that's, an example of what we want to see, right? We had someone that was committed to the child, but felt so overwhelmed by not getting the supports they needed that was potentially going to be another move for the child. And as Yusuf, 100 homes between 5 and 13, that's just not it's not acceptable for how we handle, and treat our kids in care. I mean, clearly, there's things that when we have so many moves that are going wrong, where we aren't supporting the youth or the caregiver where they are, or we're just not making good matches, because sometimes that's a factor too of making sure that the home is the right fit for the individual child. And so, to me, that wasn't one where the police was being called, but it was one where there were mental health needs, and it was a potential placement change. There's another situation that we recently heard of where the youth called and they were contemplating suicide, and they were able to sort of calm the situation enough to get someone out, the team out, and they were able to stabilize the situation. It was an older youth who I think is on the cusp of aging out, and they were able to help connect, the child to housing and other supportive resources. And, I don't know what that situation would have looked like if it was the police going out. So, I mean, I think those are just two different examples, but I just think it's really powerful when we are able to use resources that are more strength-based and are approaching it from a different perspective than a law enforcement one.
Yeah, for sure. Yusuf, how about for you? Is there, obviously you're telling other people's stories as well. Is there something that really stands out in your mind?
That stands out. I didn't catch that. What you said?
Just like a story that stands out in your mind about why this work is important and is important to you.
I feel like it's important because whenever I'm in my community, I see people who are just like me, who were needed some guidance, needed some type of form of leadership. And like growing up in foster homes, I wasn't stable, so I didn't have a actual parent that I could actually call on, or ask questions and figure out how to do things properly. And and another thing is, growing up in foster care, I wasn't able to do sports. I wasn't able to do things that normal kids were able to do. So, that's why I try to get in my community and help any way I can, whether it's giving back with clothes, taking kids out to activities like, going to the Y, just any way that I can help is what I do. So it's just something I like to do.
That's awesome. Thank you. I have a couple of questions in the chat. If you have others, please add them. Yusuf, a question: having started medication at such a young age, what was your understanding in your child's mind of why you needed to take the medication?
So they were given all these acronyms like ADD, ADHD, things at that time that I didn't know. And I was just like, okay. And, and I was taking these meds and just out of it, just going to sleep and and then they're asking me like I said, why are you not participating in activities? And I can't because I'm so tired, I'm drowsy. So yeah.
Thank you. Another question: do you ever have to involve the police in safety situations? They're saying that they've run into that with mental health crisis responders, where they often have the police with them or transport them to hospitals. And how do you maybe navigate when it's necessary that the police are there?
So I can speak to, what we've heard from the statewide hotline. I mean, they are very much trying their best to de-escalate situations and be able to stabilize to the point where there's a safety plan in place and there's time for a team to get out there. That said, in rare circumstances, there may be situations that are so, the safety cannot, their attempts to secure safety are not, I guess, they don't seem sufficient, whereas you need someone to get out there in minutes, not an hour. And so what they've told us is they are doing everything they can, and they think most cases you can come up with a way to stabilize, but I'm not going to say that there aren't situations where they do have to involve police, because if there's a fear of like imminent death or things like that, you want to make sure that the person, is safe. In those situations, they do try to also have a team go out to be that sort of more trauma-informed presence. So again, there are circumstances where that may occur, but what we've been told is that most of the time it can be avoided.
And then they have a question of whether you have in the Bay Area, if you have a presence in the Bay Area.
Yeah, so when FERS was created, one of the things we were also trying to deal with is that every area had their own resources and they differed. And so when we created FERS, we created a statewide solution is what we were trying to do. So there's the statewide hotline, and every county had to create a 24/7 team. And so they could do it regionally or they could do it by county. In the Bay Area at this point, I think every county did it at a county level. So every county in the Bay Area has a team that that the statewide hotline does a warm handoff to, depending on where the person is located.
Gotcha. Youssef, so the question is, in your circumstances, do you feel like a program like FERS would have benefited you? And then they also kind of want to know what an example of how police in your hometown respond to crisis.
Absolutely, I could have benefited from FERS. So also, the way they respond is not very good. So, I live in Wichita, Kansas, and as you know, if you look it up, Kansas is very last to do a lot of things. They're very stuck in their ways. And when you look at something like a case like Cedric Lofton, that's how they deal with things here. And, it agitates, you can do certain things and it can trigger a foster kid, and you're not even knowing that you did it. It can trigger them. And, so like when calling the police, when a kid is having a mental breakdown, now you feel like he's threatened, that kid is threatened, and that can cause a kid to get amped up and do things that shouldn't be happening. So when you ask like, how do we respond here? That's how they respond. And that resulted in death, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we just aren't necessarily aware of our words and how they land, especially with kids who've come from trauma. So that can look as simple as like a police officer drives by and the parent's like, oh, they're looking for you, and they're just joking around. But that may land as traumatic for a young person. Or if you have a kid who's throwing a temper tantrum and you say, I'm going to call the cops if you don't quit, you may not mean it, but that might be, starts building that fear in the young person that re-triggers at another point in time. So I think we have to be careful in how we as parents talk about some of those things. So that was just what I wanted to share. Jessica, I think this question's for you. How do you shift an agency's philosophy to stop trying to resolve all of their own crisis response and to access these organizations with expertise? And how do you work with policies, regulation makers to allow organizations to be able to use these resources instead of being mandated to do their own response?
I think it's a culture shift. FERS, some of it, the statewide hotline, it is a state managed program, but they, like the state of California, did a process to pick a nonprofit to run the statewide hotline. In the counties, some counties are using county staff as their responders, and some are contracting with community-based organizations to be the ones to be the teams. We've certainly really encouraged, community-based responses and just the use of peers in general. and, you know, I think that that's been overall well received, but it's a culture shift. So I think it's just a matter of continuing to have those conversations and encourage it and bring caregivers and youth to the table to say, this is what we want. Because it's a lot more effective if a youth or caregiver is saying, it's really important to me that it be someone in my community. You know, I can say that as an advocate that's working with youth and caregivers, but it's having the youth or caregiver at the table to be the one directly sharing their perspective, I think is really key to all of that.
Sure. I think this is an interesting question. You know, we often hear accounts of foster care placements jeopardized by over-reliance on 911 calls among school personnel. So police getting involved because of something that happened at school. Are there any suggestions or resources for schools to do instead of calling the police and getting them involved in, you know, various things there?
From the first perspective, I mean, we're trying to make sure that schools are also aware of it as a resource. So I mean, that's one thing, and I think in any state, just making sure schools are aware of the alternatives that might exist in each community. And you know, again, supporting the culture shift and the education that should be what you call instead of the police whenever possible. I think often schools might have policies or protocols that just default to police. And so I think there needs to be like a lot of individual advocacy at the local level and at the school level on, you know, why that is why we want to have alternatives, and what those alternatives are. I also think at the school level, you know, there's a need for a lot more training of school personnel on trauma, right? I mean, oftentimes they may not have that, and they're doing something that, you know, is leading to an escalation of a situation themselves. And then, you know, if they have training on sort of how to recognize trauma and triggers and how to respond in a sort of positive behavioral response, I think that there's more that could be done that could calm situations without anyone ultimately needing to come out.
Yeah, there's definitely some organizations doing a lot of great work in the trauma-informed classroom setting. So I think, you know, that starts as early as kindergarten for these young people. If we have teachers who understand that last night might have been rough for the kid because of something that was going on in their family or whatever, and we learned how to respond from that trauma-informed perspective, that would be great. I don't have any more questions, but I was curious, you know, like Youssef, if there's anything that you would want to share, you know, as we end this conversation, you know, is there anything that you want foster and adoptive parents to really understand about the experience of the young person?
I would just encourage them all to, you know, just be patient, be understanding, because, you know, we go through a lot, you know, so everybody has their different struggles. Everybody has their ups and downs. They go through different things on a daily basis. You know, one day they might be missing their mom. One day they just might just be having a bad day. It's just a lot of different things that goes into play. So I would encourage everyone to be patient and just be gentle with them, and, you know, treat them with love, because when I was coming up, that's how I responded. If I really felt like you cared about me, I would respond to that. And, you know, I could calm down and I could do as you ask. If, you know, I felt like it was genuine and you really cared about me deeply. So that's one thing that I would say.
Thank you. Jessica, any last thoughts from you for our audience?
I think just building on what Youssef said, you know, I mean, we know how important having like a positive, nurturing, unconditional relationship is. So, you know, I think that can be so healing for a child. And so I think we can't underestimate the importance of that. And that's why, you know, trying to build that strong relationship between the youth and the caregiver and promote that stability is so important.
Yeah, for sure. I think we have one more slide to put up, where people can find us going forward. But I really appreciate all of you joining us today for the conversation. I know that these aren't easy. That's kind of why my team decided this year's conversations were going to be tough conversations. The things that we don't always talk about with foster adoptive families, because we know that in real time, some of these things really do happen. And we want our people who are feeling called to be foster and adoptive families to be prepared, so that we have better outcomes for kids in foster care, so that we're not reading those awful statistics all the time, because I really want to see that change. So you can find our Fostering Families Today on our social media platforms, or at fosteringfamiliestoday.com. You can participate in our Youth Voice program if you're a young person in foster care, or if you have a young person, please encourage them to share their stories with us. I think they're the most important voices that we share, because they are the people who can teach us the most, and we can learn and grow from them. So I appreciate all of you today. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks so much.